I just wanted to have a conversation with you I invited you into my backyard for that very reason, because I don't want this to come across finger pointing or blaming or any of those kinds of things. But I think it's something, because I'm hearing it all the time, but I think it's something we're seeing more and more of. And whatever you want me to call it, that leaders or people are dithering, delaying, delegating. I get it. I totally get it. The fear of repercussions these days are huge. And the comment that I've heard or read or something is we allow people to think after the fact about what should have been done. Oh, and let's not forget, we give each one of these experts in the stands a megaphone and give them permission to share whatever it is they think or feel. I totally understand the consequences of acting. But what would happen if courage before clarity was actually a required piece, content, character, if you will? Years ago, there was a little boy who built a model boat with his mom and dad, and one day he was out in the pond and he was sailing it, and a breeze came up and the boat started to move away from him, and he couldn't think of anything to do. And then his mom came up, and what she did was she started to lob rocks over the boat onto the other side, into the water on the other side. And what it did was the rocks into the water created a ripple that actually pushed the boat back toward shore. Sometimes I wonder if that's part of what's happening. People are lobbing rocks after something has left the shore, after a decision has been made, and the repercussions are driving leaders back. So sometimes the fear of repercussions steers the ship more than courage or clarity. I know I've used it before, but that hot water in tea bag principle. And it's these moments, it's these critical moments, whether it be crisis, change, or growth, that determine which way the ship sails, which way growth happens. And part and parcel of that will be, what are you and I putting in the tea bag right now? Because that's the stuff that's going to leak out in hot water. Why dither? Why delay? Why delegate? I'm going with the D's, but it could be abdicate. One of the things that I know for a fact, because I've heard a couple people say it to me, well, John, if we acknowledge there's a problem, then, well, we're going to have to do something about it, and I'm not sure what to do. So therefore, we're just going to do some different programs. And as I mentioned to you, the fear of doing something wrong with the experts in the stands. But there's the other part that I just heard from a senior leader last week. And his comment was, there's a bunch of, I'm editing his words, but there's a bunch of peacocks strutting around, all thinking they're in charge. Everybody's strutting around like they're making the decision. And so that I didn't run down a bunny trail, I wrote down some stories just that have happened to me in the last month. I got a text actually from a CAO. You around for a call, please? So I said, sure. He explained the situation and asked if I could help, meet with his leadership. And he explained the individual that was behaving completely inappropriate 40 years ago was acceptable, not today. And a month later, almost a month, I emailed to say, so where are things stand? Like, what's happening? And Craig's comment to me was, he knew that morale is sliding. He knew that a decision needed to be made. They'd sat in rooms together, talked about the problem, but to actually act on it, the repercussions were going to be huge. Craig's solution: keep scheduling meetings about the meetings. Frameworks were proposed. Committees were formed. The language got sophisticated and inaction got more organized. There was another leader, I'll call her Leanne, different organization, the exact same pattern, but that version was far more visible. She was articulate. She was compelling. You know, the kind of leader that people could rally around and absolutely everybody agreed. Her organization talked a phenomenal game. The value statements were on the wall. People were talking about psychosocial health and safety. Yet when the critical moments emerged, they had another meeting. The situations sat like a weight on everybody's shoulder. Nobody named it. Nobody was willing to call it out, but they knew exactly the kind of leader they were talking about. Part of that challenge, and I totally understand it. That's why I said it's a conversation. I'm not interested in finger pointing or blaming. That accomplishes nothing. But how are we helping people, leaders, live with courage? Because that's the only way to thrive. There is no other way. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's actually about values. You know, if I'm going to act in this situation and it might cost me my job, does that mean that, well, it's about money, about pension or job security or some of those other things? Or is it about doing what needs to be done? Courage is required before the outcome is known. You know, I love what Proverbs 15:22 says. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Counsel matters. Input matters. Collaboration matters. But I'm not saying be reckless or just, what's the expression, willy-nilly. But at some point, we're not going to have all the data. We're not going to have all the data, all the information. Wouldn't it be nice to be a leader, to have some safe tower where we can make those decisions and there's no fog, there's no concerns, there's none of those things. But that's not how leadership works. It does require to lead in the fog. That's why I talk about the valuable leader using the focus, the values-anchored focus, the values-anchored motivation, because to guide, lead through fog, we have to know what our compass bearing is. But you know what the rub in all of this? If we live by the fear of the repercussions, if we do not act in courage, it applies to all areas of life. Absolutely, in the workplace, it can apply to a whole bunch of repercussions. And I'm not saying those things are reasons, but I'm not going to pretend they don't exist. But they apply in other areas of our lives. You know, if we walk through the data and the repercussions and the consequences and all those other things of being a parent, most people with any IQ would never choose to be a parent. We can't afford it. Never mind the consequences and the risk and the concerns. Never mind choosing to be married. You know, in churches, the expression that, well, we need to pray this through. In nonprofit organization, well, we need to seek input from the board. In others, it sounds great, but no one challenges. I just had this happen to me in the last 72 hours. I asked a question about how the funding, the payment for the per diem rate works, how that unfolded, and I was explained what the rate was, and then, well, I'm sorry you don't feel like you want to be doing this. Obviously, I will find somebody else to do the training. Yeah, you know what? I know what that feels like. I know the repercussions. That wasn't my context. It happened. Can't change how they interpret it. Another organization, independent organization, the senior leader was the second one. It was a group that started, educational organization, started. The original leader had passed away. The new leader had been there for a while. We had a conversation around succession planning and getting these pieces in place. Well, this sounds really good. And yeah, we need to make some decisions. And well, I'm just going to talk to the board and then I'll be in touch. I got an email to say, yeah, the board's decided that we're going to do this a little differently. Okay. Your organization, not mine. I was talking with an employee at this workplace. 9 months later, he still has not heard a single word about any succession planning. The other side to that coin of dithering, delegating, abdicating, of the focusing on the repercussions, the risks, is we miss the rewards. Can you imagine walking into an organization where the leader says, or a leader says, I'm actually really nervous about this decision. If you will, I'm a little afraid. I'm scared about the decision because I want to make the best. I want to make the right one. As I mentioned earlier, on one hand, we glorify self-reliance. I've got this. I'm fine. I'm good. But on the other hand, we give a megaphone, a bullhorn to every person in the stands, and we give them permission to speak through the megaphone and think that their opinion matters after the fact. We all need workplaces with somebody with that courage to shepherd guide. The person who is willing to not have it all together, but that person who is willing to act with courage and not worry about needing to have all the items on some checklist checked off before initiative happens. Time to think does not mean time to hide. Courage is not the absence of fear. Leadering is not hiding with excellent vocabulary. Probably another example, I'll call this person, her name's Sandra, but she was a director in a mid-sized organization, huge restructuring. And every meeting they had, she kept coming, well, a little more information. Can somebody gather some information? And so what they would do is they would form a committee. And by the way, I got to tell you the best definition I've ever heard of a committee. A committee is a group of the unwilling meeting about the unnecessary for an indefinite amount of time. Sandra and her organization formed committees. Now, granted, they called them teams, but they formed committees, got a whole bunch more data, collected another data, and then at the next meeting, oh, this is really good insight, good information, but no decision got made. I ended up asking her about how the decision, sometime later, how things had gone, and she said, well, I didn't actually get around to making the decision, and when I did, it landed flat. And I said, well, I'm not trying to upset you, but why were you waiting? Well, I wanted it to feel right. Okay. Feeling is an emotion. Responsibility or being responsible is a decision, is a choice. And like I've said to my kids, I've said to many people, adulting sucks. It really does. Because being responsible, I don't like it. I want somebody else to tell me what I need to do. It's so much more convenient because it's not my fault if or when things don't work. Courage builds trust quicker, and it is far more durable. I want to repeat this because there's so much talk about trust in the workplace. Courage builds trust quicker, and it is far more durable when it happens without perfect plans. It's not waiting until the outcome is known, if you will. It means starting our meetings, starting those conversations with, here's what I think we need to do. Here's what I want to do. I am nervous and concerned about things working perfectly, but I can't control that. So before I take the initial step, what else am I missing? Any other inputs? Because we're going to act after this. We're going to take action after this meeting. I want you to think about something, please. There is probably a decision in your past that is mostly shaped who you are. And did you wait until you had all the facts known? I know for myself, I know for every person I've asked, the decisions that have most shaped who they are, they made before the outcome was known. And that's why when it comes to values, we cannot have a values-based conversation. We cannot have values-anchored action without talking about faith. That kind of faith, not religious faith, but that kind of faith that says, I will prevail in the end. I will get through this. And that is why I talk about passio fidelis, passionate faithfulness to our values, because that leads to persona auctoritas, the character, ER, the authority that comes from who we are, because people see the walk and the talk matching. They can trust, respect, and follow. I know that there's a lineup of people banging on leaders' heads about not acting, not taking the initiative, and not acting with courage. I will never be one of them, but I will change the conversation. If we're going to do that to leaders, then we have to do that to followers. If this decision is so important for you, take the initiative. Act before you know the results. You see, that's where our common humanness aligns. When leaders and employees, when human beings lock arms and we take the initiative before we know. You see, courage before certainty, before clarity, is not some fancy leadership principle. It is a gift you give your team. You give the people you love. It is a gift that you and I give ourselves. If this has landed for you, I'd love to hear from you. If you know there's a decision that you need to be making and you need somebody locking arms with you, somebody in your corner, please reach out. Let's have that conversation. I know what it feels like to act before certainty, before clarity. Maybe there's another leader that you can encourage. But at the end of the day, encourageability, to act with courage before certainty, is a gift that you give yourself, the ones you say you love, and your people, your team. Please take courage and be encouraged to act upon those values because you know it's the right thing to do. Thank you.